Hello, you all. Welcome to our Brazilian debates. Today, we're going to have a debate entitled Rights, Social Dynamics, and the Favelas of Rio de Janeiro. But we just would like to remind you that this is not the first debate. It's actually one of a series of debates that we started in July with different themes, with people from different fields. So we had professors from sociology, from law, geography, engineering, international relations, architecture, political science, social communications, educations, and so many other departments that have been working with us, bringing you these debates and talking about important issues in Brazilian societies in these times of pandemics. And today we have this last Brazilian debates for the year 2020. And we're gonna have our guest speakers today, Dr. Angela Randolfo Paiva from the Social Science Department, and Rafael Soares Gonçalves from the Social Work Department, and they will be debating with you. So I would like to tell you in advance that you may have questions throughout the debate, so please write your questions through the chat. We have a person that is going to be responsible for taking notes of the questions, and we will present the questions to our guest speakers at the end of the debate. So we encourage you to participate with us and give insights about what you're about to hear in these debates. So we would like to thank you all for being here with us once again, and be participative in our Brazilians debate today. So I'm gonna just give the floor to Dr. Angela Paiva, who is gonna be starting our debate today.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, the last debate of the year, and hopefully we'll have lots of other next year. We're planning that right now. So my presentation will be, let me see where it is here. I want to discuss with you the human rights and the social dynamics in the Brazilian democracy. Okay, and I want to emphasize that that there is a process of returning to democracy. Okay, so the idea of democracy just it didn't appear out of the blue, right? It was a long process, and especially at the end of the 70s. At the end of the 70s, there was a new role of civil society, and all those associations. Bar association, press, unions, universities, NGOs, progressive church. This was quite important. The progressive church with the several pastorals, they were the only public space available for organization of movements, of associations. So the black pastoral, the workers, the land. So they were very important as the locus of civil organization. And of course, the new social movements were being organized at the end of the 70s. And I want to give special attention to the Black movements, because there were many different groups, collective groups of Black trans. But in 1978, all those groups got together, and they decided to sign a document that is called the MNU, the Movimento Negro Unificado, Black Unified Movement, and they were denouncing racism in Brazil. They were asking for access to for education and for justice. Those were the three main common agenda for all Black movements that existed. So, and of course, at the end of the 70s, there was also something very important in Brazil. It was the amnesty. There were all people who were on exile. They came back and they helped organize what was going to happen during the 80s, right? So in the 80s, wait a minute, it doesn't, not here. In the 80s, we had the reorganization of the political parties, and the novelty here was PT, Partido dos Trabalhadores. It was the first political party that was organized bottom up, okay? Because in Brazil we had a civic culture tradition that the political things were organized at the top, right? So in the 80s, it's funny because the economists, they say that the 80s was a lost decade, right? Because we had lots of economic problems in the 80s. But for social sciences, the 80s was a wonderful decade because we had many different organizations, many social issues that came to the fore to tackle injustice in one of the most unequal countries in the world, right? So we are not, Brazil is not a poor country, is one of the 10th economies of the world, but our our inequality is one of the highest, right? Still today. So in the 80s, the consolidation of social movements, several of them, I'm going to mention just a few here: landless, blacks, native peoples, women, environment. Okay, then a little bit later, the LGBT and the homeless. Okay, so there were many different movements with a new agenda, and all that organization, those collective action, were important to bring a new agenda for the new constitution. So we can say that the 1988 constitution, it's called the citizenship constitution, because it was the assimilation of many of the demands that were present in the public sphere. And there was the need for the fruition of civil rights, social rights, and collective rights at the same time. So it was really a very important moment in Brazil. So it was a very optimistic moment in Brazil. Now, what happened in the 90s, right? In the 90s, there were political opportunities open with elected governments. Let me just put this here. Since 1989, of course, we had an impeachment in 1992, but then we had stable political elections, and but the democratic governments had to deal with the persistent inequalities based on race, on gender, on class, region, and ethnicity. So, and those demands brought many struggles for rights in the public sphere. So it was a quite interesting moment. And I will call this collective action that goes beyond social movements. I call them social dynamics, because there was a strong interaction between NGOs, social movements, colectivos, collective groups in favelas, in the periphery. We have a new interaction with the state and during Cardoso administration. And it was the first administration that when there was the recognition of the existence of racism in Brazil. That was quite unusual, because there was a denial of the existence of racism in Brazil. And there was a huge meeting in 1997, and Fernando in Cardoso's speech, he acknowledged the existence of racism. So, during his administration, it started the process of having human rights at the center. So, he created the Human Rights Bureau, which worked with all cabinets. So, in order to pay attention to the flaws in human rights fruition, right? It was very, very difficult, right? But that's why I call it a process, because it's a long, difficult process, okay? And during Cardoso entrance in elementary education, you can say, wow, but this is, that was the last decade of the 20th century. And only in 1995, we had the universal entrance in elementary education. I'm not going to discuss here about the quality of that discussion, of that education. We can talk about that later, right? But during his government, it was also seen the first policies of inclusion. There was a discussion about affirmative action policies in public service. There is a problem there with service we see, right? And the benefits for families with children at school. Okay, so it was the time that there was a new trend that a government that was paying attention to the demands of civil society. And I cannot leave out the environmental conference organized by the United Nations in Rio in 1992, right? And where we had many different policies for climate change, for carbon emissions. And Brazil has always had a leading role, at least until 2 years ago, in its environmental laws. Okay. Now, going to Lula's government, here we can see that Lula, the state was more porous to social demands. So Lula opened up the government for civil society, and he created several secretariats. Those were quite interesting bureaus for racial equality, for youth, and for women. Those secretariats were meant to tackle inequality in those specific areas, and to foster public policies to enhance new opportunity based on race, based for youth and for women. And of course, these youth and women and race can be together, right, in the intersectionality that is present in as far as inequality is concerned. Now, Lula conceived many public policies to tackle inequality, right, in housing, in the Bolsa Familia, so the minimum benefit for people, so all families were entitled to have a special benefit for their children, right? There was the rise of the minimum wage, there was credit for small business, and of course, the city planning was at the fore, and the cultural policies for peripheral areas were at the center of the public policies conceived at that moment. Rafael is going to talk about that later on. So, and during Lula's government, we had a strong civil society participation. There were many forums, conferences, councils, They were organized with representation of civil society, with community leadership, and with parties, with universities. So there was a building up of knowledge, right, about the problems of Brazil, okay? Not only in the urban area, but also in the rural areas. Another thing that is very interesting in during Lula's government is that he was very sensitive for the movement that was taking place in public universities, and he fostered the public policies for affirmative action in public universities, and to note that public universities in Brazil are tuition free. So, and that opened up opportunity for high school uh, students from public schools, and they had for the first time they had the opportunity to attend a public university. I'm listing several things, and then we can come back to one if you have time, right? What was the problem for me? The emphasis was on individualistic improvement when the economy went very well, and without fostering structural change in health, education, house, and wealth distribution. Okay, so Brazil was still a very unequal country. Okay, although Lula had managed to take when he took office, we had 28 million people and above the poverty line, and 8 years later we had only 13 million people. So it was a lot that was achieved as far as poverty is concerned, right? So, but the problem was that he did that transfer, right? But he didn't tackle the structural change that needed in social rights, right? Especially in health, in education, in house, right? So those were those were crucial areas in Brazil. So, and then, wait a minute, here. So, and here I'm calling the dilemmas of the public sphere. Okay, there were lots of gains, right, during the first decade of the 21st century, but they were lost with the economic crisis after 2014. There was the shrinking of the middle class, especially when unemployment began to rise in Brazil. That brought frustration for people who were expecting to benefit from the welfare, that the rights that they had gained, right? But together with that, I'm talking only about the good things, right? We had more rights, we had more inclusion, but along with that, we had the resentment with new rights that were conquered, that had been conquered since the 90s. The conservative forces that did not agree with land distribution, affirmative action for Blacks, Native people's rights, or environmental laws, they had always been there. So they did not disappear, right? Just the contrary. They showed their anger with the assassination of community leaders, police brutality, the slaughter in favelas, among many other wrongdoings of since the 90s. And of course, the political parties that began to lose legitimacy after 2013, right? We had several protests in 2013, and there were many demands. There were demands for more education, for more city mobility, because people could spend 2 or 3 hours on a bus to commute from to work. And so there were difficulties in everyday life. In that, in the next 2 years, that paved the way to a new, very dangerous narrative of new politics. Okay, so and then came a savior saying that, don't see Brasilia is not making your life better, right? So there was a discredit of political parties. There was a suspicion of about corruption, about the distance of the political leaders from the problems that society was facing, okay? And that persistence of social inequality was captured in a new populist narrative. So what we had in 2018, one of the reasons to explain, right, to explain why Bolsonaro won the election, right? He was not he was in Congress, but he was not a prominent political leader. So, but he captured in a very good way that Brazil needed new politics. The new politics was the denial of the old political parties, and it was a straight relationship with the president and the people. So the people now, we always hear on television talking about the people. The people want conservative, traditional family. So there is a conservative trend that was captured in this new politics with a new populist leader. Okay, and to finish, I can my bet, right? I was going to write what can be next, but my bet is I'm not that pessimistic. I think that organizations of civil society are here in strong bonds that have emerged since the 90s, also created solidarity that fostered social, cultural, and political action. Sometimes they are together, right? The cultural action, for instance, in favelas, they are very political, and the political protests are very cultural too. So, and then they come together, right? And there is a strong relationship built among universities, community leaders, social movements, institutions, and progressive sectors of society. This relationship is crucial at a moment when the state is withdrawing its presence. That's what's been seen in the past 2 years. The government trying to cut, to rule out the gains we had as far as human rights are concerned. Okay? But my bet is that rights are a powerful force in the struggle for recognition and political change. Okay, I will stop here, and then we can discuss more of the things that I listed here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Angela, for your presentation. So we are now giving the floor to Dr. Rafael Gonçalves from the Social Work Department. We'll continue with his speech now.
Okay, so first I want to say thanks to Ricardo to the invitation. It's very nice to be here again in Brazilian Debates. I will try to do my best in English. It's really easier for me to speak French because I had lived 7 years there in Paris, or to speak Spanish because I have family in Argentina, and we are very sad nowadays because of the Maradona death. But okay, but I will try to do my best in English. And also, it's very difficult to speak after Angela because I think it's very interesting the panorama about the Brazilian situation after the dictatorship here in Brazil. So I will try to continue the ideas of that Angela starts, and to talk more, to focus in the favelas case. And not to, it's very complicated to talk in 15 minutes about more than 1 century of history. So I will try to choose one case, one subject. So I will try to talk about the museum. It's a kind of social movement that exists. There are more or less 10 or 15 years in some favelas here in Brazil. So the idea is to work with the history and to work with the memory. And I think it's a kind of way to resist with a lot of very bad and negative representation about favela. So for me, it would be easier to read my presentation, but I have some photos that you can follow me. Okay. So first of all, my name is Rafael Sérgio Gonçalves. I work at the social work department, but I'm not social work. I am lawyer and historian, but I feel that I am much more historian nowadays than lawyer. So, and there are more or less 20 years that I try to work about the history of the favelas. So the first favelas were established in Rio at the end of 19th century. And by the beginning of the 20th century, they were already an integral part of city's urban and social fabric. Since then, favelas have been regarded as Rio's primary urban problem, especially about sanitation and public security. So you can see here, for example, it's the Maracanã Estate, it's the Esqueleto favela that it was removed in the 16th. And here, it's the case of Braz de Pina favela that resists against the eradication in the 16th during the dictatorship. Okay, but on the other hand, the favelas have also become a recognized symbol of Rio de Janeiro. The Brazilian modernists of the 1920s imagined a favela different from the public health officials of the beginning of the century. So, for example, Tarsila do Amaral here, you can see, Lazer Segal, you can see also Portinari, that try to represent favelas in another way. So Samba also emerges as the music of Brazil, and the favela, once considered the very antithesis of modernity, become the expression of a certain Brazilianness. Different artists and urban planners visit the favelas during their visits to Rio in the 20s and the 30s. For example, Blaise Cendrale, Tagore, Agache, Corbusier, and also, for example, the futurist Marinette in the 26th. So these visitors were really interested in the favelas for their culture and also for the very important presence of the Afro-Brazilian population. However, favelas continue to be viewed as a problem to resolve. This results is a distorted understanding of reality, while also compromising public policies and perpetuating specific forms of intervention. These informal communities have long been considered by the upper class as temporary settlements that would one day be eradicated as the formal city developed. We can see the same ambiguity in the representation of the favelas nowadays. At the same time that several favelas were removed during the preparation of the mega events, World Cup, Olympic Games, you can see in these photos, for example, it's the Vila Autódromo favelas that is just in front of the Olympic Park. The favelas continue to be divulgated to the world, as you can see for example, in the opening ceremony of the Olympic Games, at the beginning of the World Cup match, and even the configuration of a favela space in the most important rock concerts of the city, Rock in Rio. So for example, here it's the small film that passed just before the match in the World Cup. You can see here the Olympic ceremony. You can see that it's the favela that we can try to show for the world. And here it's the space of favelas that exists in the last Rock in Rio concerts. The provisional and exigent nature of this community raised critical questions concerning ways to historically reflect on this space. How can there be a history of something fleeting that should not exist and would soon disappear? How can their past be properly reflected upon if these urban spaces are not supposed to survive into the future? Creating the history of this place, salvaging the memory of their residents, understanding their daily lives, reveals itself to be indispensable for the formulation of new public policies for favelas. Although theories of marginality reinforced homogenized reflection of the favelas during the last century, associating their residents with illegality. It's understood that such a reality was much more complex and, for example, many of the residents were fully integrated in the labor market, completely different from the negative representations imposed on this space and their residents. We understand, therefore, that making the history of this place becomes itself as a political act, and therefore crucial for the creation of new favela-oriented public policies. This is even more the case when the process of systematization and narration of local memory is carried out by the residents themselves. The silence on the history of the favelas is a deliberately political act, and in this sense, rescuing and valuing local memories, as well as archiving and forming documentary collection about this space, is clearly an act of resistance. In this context, the experience of social museology provides centrality to the memories of favelas residents and question the exclusion of these memories, which was encouraged a silence of certain urban experience. So, what I want to talk about, it's about the museum, this phenomenon in the favelas. Here, it's the Museu da Favela, the Favela Museum at Cantagalo Favelas. Here you can see the Marés Museum at the Maré Favelas. And here it's the Eradication Museum that exists in the favelas that I showed you before, the Vila Autódromo Favela. You can also see here in this space up the Eradication Museum, the memory, it's not removed. We can't remove the memory of the people. So, community museums, social museums, appear in the movement to condemn inequalities and to construct more equitable memories. They seek to strengthen local memories and stories, favoring identity empowerment. Social museology has been consolidated in Brazil as a specific object of government policy since the creation of the Brazilian Institute of Museums, IBRAM, in 2009, just during the Lula government, as Angela told us about the very specific and important moment of the Brazilian history. The government action that best demonstrates the application of the social museology category was the Memory Points program. This policy provided funds for social movements that advance local memory. These initiatives of social museology played a pivotal role in mobilizing initiatives and stimulating public policies focused on preserving favelas, history, and memory. Of course, after Bolsonaro, this program doesn't exist anymore. Recognizing this space as objects of history gives meaning to the process that have consolidated them to understand them as an integral part of the city. And this is the most important point for us, to accept, to recognize that the favelas is part of the city. Through research and extensive debates raised in the field of social museology, in Brazil and throughout the world, it's now possible to redefine the different socio-occupational process of urban space. Thus, there is an observed appropriation of the museum language for the production of counter-narratives, proposition, and social-political interventions, which open possibilities to rethink the favelas and in a broader way, the city itself. And here, for me, it's a very important idea for the favelas is to think that it's not just the inhabitants of favela have something to say, not just for their place where they live, but also for me, for all the city. And for example, we can talk about that later, but we can see a very important movement against, for example, the mobilization against the COVID, the coronavirus. It's very important, the movement inside the favelas. And I think that we don't leave a most important problem, because the social move inside the favelas work a lot to mobilize the people and the force against the coronavirus. So the formation of a material archive, also composed of oral sources, reinforce not only the importance of these characters, but also pose the challenge of constitution structures that can preserve local memories for future generations. We understand Favelas Museum as a catalyzing collective subject, instructing and generating the organizational dynamics of local collective memory through the constitution process of social cultural development of daily life. This broad network of collective memory sustains debates of resistance and flows of local insurgents. The development of museums in favelas results from the need to reorganize local culture through the consolidation of an organic, plural, and insurgent memory. It constitutes a strategy of occupation and collective social resistance with concern for a material locus, an aggregator of memories, which is transformed in political consciousness. It's important to emphasize how memory has been used by residents and movements in the construction of a counter discourse against the very negative representation of favelas. This is revealed, for example, through the formation of museums, as we said, but also of the expansion, for example, of the community-based tourism. This kind of tourism is a response against tour operators that seems to do safaris in the favelas. Community-based tourism is usually conducted by local guides, and they use the local memory and history as a political agenda. So we can see here in the photos, for example, it's the guide, Cosme and Cynthia, they lived in the Providencia favela, and they work with tourists. And it's very interesting because they use the memory, they use the history of these areas to show and to work in the political, also in a political way. So it's a way to have money, it's their work, but also to transform the representation of the favelas. Here, it's the case of Brasilidade, the Sheila at Santa Marta favelas at Botafogo neighborhood. But it's not only the community-based tourism. There are also the course, the formation about the history of favelas with university professors, favela leaders, and even the university students from the favelas. So we can see here, for example, Histórias Vivas. It's a kind of discourse that try to mix the professor, the student universities, and the leaders. But as Angela explained for us about the Lula's education politics, many inhabitants of the favelas have managed to get into the universities in the later years with affirmative action policies. So for example, our department, my department, the Angela's department, social work and social science department, receive a lot of students from the favelas and the other peripheral zones. And for us, it's very, very, very interesting because these students play a very important work and do a very important work, for example, in the coronavirus problems nowadays. And it's interesting because it's a kind of exchange. They receive a lot of tools from the universe, and I think they use that in their favelas, in their neighborhood. But also for us at our university, I think that we open our mind and we start to see other problems of the city when we receive these students in our university. So it's very interesting for us also because we start to have other questions, other situations. They show us another reality that it's really important for us. So to finish, the use of history has led to the construction of an urban project that no longer focus only on the future, like the modernist, like the futurist, like Marinette, but also on the past. So it's a return to the city, to that part of the city denied by modernism, which takes advantage of the values of the traditional city as a nucleus of meaning to redesigning the modern city. Recounting its own history is a counter-discourse to the modernization project, and it brings new possibilities for reflection, the place of the favelas in the city. And to finish, only to show you that the cases of, for example, the social museum, the local museum, it's not only a case here in Brazil and in Rio. I just want to finish to show you some other cases around the world, and I have the opportunity to visit some of them. So here it's Muquifo, for example, it's a Favelas museum at Belo Horizonte. It's a very important city in Brazil, the capital of the Minas Gerais state. But also I can show you, for example, the Conventicus Museum at Buenos Aires, the slums, the social houses, the popular social houses at Buenos Aires. Also that I loved, it's the Siloé Popular Museum at Cali, that we have a partnership. It's very interesting, this experience. And the last one, it's the Design Museum at Dharavi Favelas at Mumbai in India. So I'm sure that we can find other kind of museum around the world that try to work with the memory, and it's a way to show for everybody and for the society that they are a history, and they want to use this history and I think that to have the right past, it's the first way, it's the first step to have the right to the future and to have the right to the city. Thanks, and sorry for my English.
Thank you, Rafael. It was a really good presentation about the situation in favela. So we're gonna give the floor back to Dr. Paiva so that she makes her considerations. Angela?
Well, Rafael and I didn't sit down to organize the presentation, right, Rafael? But what you presented was really a good example of what I was talking about the social dynamics of the process of more inclusion, right? And all the social activism in the favelas are really incredible. And of course, affirmative action was very important to as a part of that project, right? We have that at PUC. Our university was the first university to conceive affirmative action policies. It was a quite middle class, high middle class, white university, right? And now we have people from favelas, from peripheries, together with people that are from middle class, high middle class. So nowadays we have a more diverse university, right? My question to you, Rafael, do you think that all this new trend for to the end of the stigma of the dwellers of favela. Do you think that this is less now than before?
I don't. I think in the society, no, but it's very interesting because nowadays the social movements, the idea that the favela it's another place, it's different from the other parts of the city. If in the past it was a stigma, nowadays it's how can I say, it's a potential act. It's something that what I want to say that the social movement in the favelas work with the difference. And for us, it's like a proud to be different and something that connect, for example, the racial culture, the Afro-Brazilian culture in Brazil. So it's the idea of the space, the race, and the other question that it's mixed to construct another discourse. So it's very interesting. For example, in the past, normally the people that live in favelas avoid to use the expression favelas, for example. So we live in the community, it's very strange for us because there are a very strong stigma with these words. But nowadays, no. Normally, the social movement they use the expression favela. It's not anymore the community, but we are proud to be favela. We are proud to be different. So for me, the challenge is how to connect our universal rights with this difference. So I think it's very complicated because we have a very big problems with the presence, the states in the favela. So nowadays there are like autonomous autonomous political strategy. So to work without the states, or sometimes to work against the states, because during the coronavirus, it was the year that our policemen kill much more than the others years in the favela. So it's crazy to think about that we ask for the people to stay home, and there are the several military operations inside the favelas. But so the people needed to work without the states, sometimes against the states. But I think that we needed to take also the states, because we needed to use the funds, we needed to use the politics. For example, the museum, it was a local movement, but it's very important, the funds for the small program that the culture ministry starts in 2009, for example. So how to fight for the state benefits, it's very complicated nowadays, I think. And I don't know, Ricardo, that I can give some two questions for Angela.
Go ahead.
For me, I don't know, Angela, if you can continue your reflection, because we have a very important political moment nowadays. It's the municipal election. What do you think about that? Do you think that this kind of Bolsonaro's wave, this extreme right in Brazil, will start to finish or not? I'm not so sure, but what do you think about that? And also, we talked just in the beginning of the debate, but about the coronavirus, what do you think with the social movement? I think that there are a very important place. And for me, our health ministry needed to listen much more the social movement, because I think they work much more better than our health ministry. So I don't know if you have some words to give for us.
Yeah, let me try to, we have a few minutes left. Let me try to sum up in that hard equation, right? Between, I was talking about, there was a strong interaction between civil society and state. And now we have the state against civil society, right? So it's now, we have a state that doesn't listen to people, that there is no, it's amazing. Now with the pandemic, there is not a single reference about the number of deaths that we've been having since March, right? So, but I think it's not to be like an optimistic person, too optimistic, but I think I believe in the political process. And I think our democracy is really young. We had 21 years of dictatorship. That's not a trivial circumstance, right? So, and since the 90s, we started to restore confidence in organizing them, in collective action, in demand for policies, for more rights. And I do think that the pandemic is showing how strong the community leaders are right, and how they are organizing the assistance for the people who are unemployed, right? Right now, we have more than 13 million people that lost their jobs. So it's really a terrible crisis, right? There is no sympathy from the government, but we have the civil society, we have associations, we have leaderships, and that was the process that I was emphasizing, right? This was not built right out of the blue, but they were built in decades. And I don't think that Bolsonaro can destroy that. Okay, I really think this municipal election was a good signal, because all the candidates that he supported lost or are losing, right? So this is a good signal for the presidential elections in 2 more years, right? So let's see if we have political expertise, right, to come with a better solution, because this trend that we have a savior, right? So this is gone, right? I think that he cannot convince the population, because he's losing popularity. Okay, and that's how we are doing now. Right now, we are trying to say, well, hopefully there will be more opportunities in 2 more years.
Okay. Thank you, Angela. Thank you, Rafael. So we're just going to move on to some of the questions we've got. So the first one is to Rafael. Rafael, how are these Favela Museums funded? Can you talk a little bit about it, please?
How many? The numbers?
No, how are they funded? Where their money come
Yeah,
from?
normally it's a social movement, so it starts sometimes with the local resource. But what I said, it was very important, this memory points program. So it's a small fund from the government. I don't know, something like $10,000. It's not so much, but and to help to improve these museums. But some of them use just the resources from the inhabitants, or to try to find the resource in, for example, in the internet, something try to help the movement. But some of them don't have, for example, a place, doesn't have a place. It's just a website. And they try to show us that the museum is the neighborhood, it's the place, it's the space. So, but it's very interesting, because to work with the memory, to work with the history, sometimes it was very strong, it's very important against some danger of eradication. For example, the case of Horto Favelas, for example, at the south zone of Rio, they start to do a very strong history work, and they use these documents against, for example, the botanical garden that tried to remove them. So it's they use the historical tools in the courts, in the process, in the law process. But it's normally they don't have enough money, and I think that it's a really problem. And sometimes they don't have a very strong institutionalization. For example, at the Sankofa Museum, it's a museum at Rocinha. Nowadays, it's a question that they start to discuss inside the museum, because some of them don't want to be institutionalized. So start to do just a social movement, not with a lot of organization, but some of them know, start to have more organization to receive funds to. So it's a very strong question inside this organization. But I didn't speak to finish this moment, just to say that there are a social museology network in Rio. So it's very interesting that these different museums work together. And it's something that I'm sure that Angela can explain much more better than me. The idea to work, this work in this network sometimes is very important in for example, the social movement in the favelas, and also for the museum.
Okay, thank you, Rafael. So we have another question. Maybe Angela can answer that, and maybe Rafael can just comment after her. It says, the violence in favela, is it only motivated by race, or could it be based on the financial conditions it faces?
Well, that's a very good question, Victoria. And I think that violence has been there, has always been there. Okay, so because the existence of favela itself is a violent project, right? So there is no presence of the state. So the people they had no place to live, so they had to build their houses on their own. Okay, so that's how the favelas started, right? And nowadays, the favelas, they are the people who live in favelas, right? If Rafael was talking about the stigma, there are all the people who live in favelas. They are workers, they are students, and only a few are engaged in traffic dealer, with the traffic dealers and so on. But we have, that's the territory where we don't have the state, okay? When the police enter favela is to show violence, okay? And so the dwellers have to live an everyday life with police brutality, with traffic dealers, and now more recently with militia, right? So we have strong relationships. And about race, of course, according to our census, we have 70% of a population are live in favela, are Black who live in favela. So there is a correlation between poverty and race, right? Because this is a very long story, but I won't have time. But the Black population was not offered education opportunities when slavery was finished. So there was a structural inequality, and that was part of the landscape. Okay, as Rafael showed, well, artists painted favelas, so there was an aesthetic, romantic view of favelas, right? But but also it's a natural, it's a naturalized process of poverty. So, and people just pass the favela with poor living conditions, and they just don't care. That's not part of the ethics of a society. Okay, so people are not angry. They are not uncomfortable passing by a favela with incredible housing conditions. So that's why I think that the redemocratization has an incredible task to end up with this poverty that was part of our landscape. So that's why that's why I'm talking about human rights, because that's part of the human rights challenge in Brazil, to have more equality in social relations.
It's possible to do small comments,
Yes, please,
Ricardo?
go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, I will try to be very fast, but I work a lot with water collective supply and electricity system in favela. So in the history of the favelas, we can see that, how can I say, the state, sometimes there are a lack of the states, and sometimes the states is there. So I think that, for example, the informality, the actor, the most important actor of informality in Rio, for me, is the state. There are the several favelas that was built by the state. So, but what I want to say, sometimes I think that we have a lack of presentism to think about favelas. So we think that we always say the same thing 1 century, there are 20 years ago, or nowadays. It's always the same ideas that it's a dangerous place, it's complicated. So, but when we start to think about the history of the favelas, it's much more complex, it's much more richer. And what I want to say that it's not so different, for example, with the peripheral zones of Chicago, of Paris, of Madrid. It's not so far. The idea is to build a house in a place that we don't know much more the owner of the area, or to build without the law, the urbanization laws. It's something, for example, in Paris, we know that in the beginning of the century, we talk about the Maloti between the two great wars. So it's not something different for the other big city around the world. But for us, that it's very, very special, specific of Rio de Janeiro, that we have favelas since the middle of the 19th century. So there are some favelas that were 1 century and a half. So and they continue to be the favela. So it's sometimes there are some favelas before the neighborhood around them. So it's very interesting to think about that. And for me, there are a very strong connection. And I think that our research here in Brazil, we needed to work much more about that, because we don't work on the past. Nowadays, we start to use a lot the race question to think the cities. And for example, the south zone of Rio, that it's the most rich area of the city, I don't know, 99% of the people are white. And we just see the black people inside the favela. So there are a story in Brazil, Luis Costa Pinto, that say in Brazil it's different from the United States, for example, because our racial segregationism, I don't know, it's in a horizontal zone. So if you live an upper area, in the hill, normally you are black, and then the opposite, the zone, the other zone, we are white. So I think that the idea of the race, it's very important, and we don't study, we need to study much more. And to finish, for me, the favelas, normally we use the idea that the favelas deform the city, but for me, it's much more, the favelas conform the city. I don't know how to say it. They construct the city of Rio. Rio, it's also the favelas. And for example, there are some things in Brazil and in Rio that it's from favelas. So the Samba, there are different kinds of music. But also, for example, there are a special tools the right tools, I don't know how to say, that we can use in the law. It's the large, for example, we can use the I don't know, the telhado, I don't know how to say, but we construct a house
the rooftop.
up on another house. So please, so that we start to do that in the favelas, and nowadays we put these possibilities in the civil code. So it's something that starts in the favela. So what I want to say that it's not just in the arts, in the music, but in the social relations, in the law. There are for example, in the case of the coronavirus, I'm sure that the people in the favelas have to, there are something to say, not just for the favelas, but for all the cities. I think that we need to listen much more to the people that come from favelas, what I think. And there's more comments to the question.
Okay, thank you, Rafael. I must tell you that our chat is on fire. We have a lot of questions. Unfortunately, we won't have time to answer to all of them. So we're just going to take one more questions and we're gonna finish it for today. But you can still, we're gonna forward your question through email to our speakers and they can respond to you later. So one last question is, what was the role of Samba in the development of favelas? I think any of you can.
Well,
look,
let me just
please.
Samba. It's interesting because favelas for a while it was the place of samba, so it was like a romantic view of the favelas, especially in the 30s and the 40s, when the favela was not that big, right? We have to think about that. There was an internal migration after the 50s, and the favelas got really, really big after especially after the 70s. Okay, so, and then Samba is not was not invented in the favela. For Samba was in the suburbs in Brazil, was in favela. Samba is part of our culture, right? But I think that now we have Samba together with hip hop. We have many other cultural manifestations in favela, especially some that are protest songs. And I think that the hip hop nowadays is what we had the protest songs in the late 60s and early 70s, when Brazil was under a dictatorship. So I think that we have to break that romantic idea that Samba, favela, people like to be poor in favela, and in a way, favelas in Brazil, in Rio, they are quite democratic because we have favelas in the middle class neighborhoods, right? And for a while, that was very good because they were the middle class and high middle class had maids and had people to work in their house and without having a lot of commuting, right? So now, but after the traffic dealers took over in the 80s, and then the things changed. I did a research in Favela da Maré, and we were asking, do we have time to tell a story, Ricardo?
If it's a short one, yes.
A short story. I was asking the dwellers, the old dwellers from the favela. Oh, and well, that before 1996, 1996 was a historic year for the people who lived there. And then I said, my goodness, what happened in 1996? 1996 was the year that the traffic dealer got into different factions. Okay, so, and then it started the fight between the drug dealers. And then the favela got really violent after, for instance, in Maré, after 1996.
Rafael would like to.
Yeah,
Yeah, go ahead.
very, very fast, I promise. I think that it's a very good question. I work a lot and I try to work not just with the institutional association, for example, the inhabitants association, so, but also for example, the culture of the museum, for example, but also the football club, and also the Samba schools. I think that they had not only how can I say a cultural influence, but also a political influence. For example, the Samba in Brazil, it's not just 1 week for a year. The Samba school exists and they are open during all the years. And for example, they are very, very important for the racial questions. If you go to Portela, for example, it's very strong the idea of the Afro-Brazilian culture. For example, the Jongo Museum in Serrinha, it's another favela that is try to improve the knowledge of Jongo music. It's a kind of Afro-Brazilian music, very close to the Samba. What I want to say in the history of the favelas, the Samba have a very strong political importance. Not for a good way, but also for a bad way. So it's very complicated. But for example, I work a lot with the influence of the Communist Party in the 40s and 50s. And the party have a very strong strategy to work with the Samba schools, for example. It's very interesting, for example, that in the 16th and the 17th, that the dictatorship removed 140,000 people during 62 until 75. Non-favelas with a very strong Samba school were removed. It's incredible. The dictatorship, it's impossible for them, for a dictatorship, to remove a favela that have a very strong Samba school. For example, they tried to remove Mangueira, and I don't know if you heard about it, but Mangueira, it's a symbol of Rio. I'm not Mangueira, I am Salgueiro. It's another Samba school, but it's very, very important to remove Mangueira. It's also to remove the Samba school that represents something very important for us, for our history, for the history of the city. So, of course, the dictatorship in the 16th, 17th didn't admit that don't remove Mangueira because the political pressure of the Samba school, but of course they work for the people. So what I want to say that there are a very political question around the Samba school that connect, of course, with nowadays with the militia, with the drug dealers, with the other question inside the favelas. But it's I think that it's really, really important also in the political way.
Okay, thank you, Rafael. So unfortunately, we're coming to an end. And I would like again to thank you all. But before I close our lecture today, our debate today, I will give room again to Dr. Angela Paiva, who is also the director of our international office, to say a few last words.
Well, now I'm going to talk about the director of the CCCI, right? And it was a great pleasure to be here. And next year, not hopefully, next year we will definitely have more debates because they are very good in a way. It's a natural practice to go to the Brazilian seminars that will happen next July. We are all waiting for the vaccine, right? So we're all waiting to go back to campus, and while that's not possible, we're going to plan more Brazilian debates. Okay, it was really, thank you, Ricardo, thank you, Danielle, for the organization of all the Brazilian debates. I can see here people who took part, like Ricardo, right? And Ricardo Esteves that's a real pleasure to be here with everybody. Okay, Ricardo.
Okay, so we would like to thank you all for being here. It was great to have you all. I just want to remind that next year, as Angela just announced, the idea is that we are gonna have our Brazilian seminars, which is a group of lectures that we offer in July. So you can see we have already the dates from July 8th to July the 23rd. So we're gonna have 12 business days with professors from different departments talk about the situation in Brazil so that you can have a panorama. So in here, you can see a little bit of the topics we're gonna be covering, plus technical visits, cultural visits, a lot of experiments on the Brazilian life through this life scenery in Rio. So we invite you all to save the dates and plan to come to Brazil, hopefully with the vaccine, with a safe environment to our campus in July next year. So thank you all again. We would like to take this opportunity also to thank all the people that have been through all the other seminars, to thank the professors that were involved. Thank you. We need all of you for this to be a success. Thank you all. So we just invite you all to take a picture, and we'd like you to open your cams. So if you can open your cameras right now, we will take a group picture.
Oh, that's nice.
It's really better to talk like that, huh? To see everybody.
That reminds me of the classrooms, with all those little black squares.
It's strange.
Okay, thank you very much. Making the picture, so smile.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.